Tennessee on the road at Alabama. Ohio State at home against Penn State. Two big games coming up this weekend. Well, I don't know. Is it two big games? Uh, it's two interesting games for sure, and probably the two most talked about games of the week. I do think Ohio State and Penn State are obviously good. Tennessee and Alabama, not that good, honestly. Tennessee and Alabama, not that good. Both teams worse than they were last year. What do we want to start with? Let's start with Tennessee on the road at Alabama. Man, this is what happened to these two teams' offense. Tennessee at least can run the ball. Let's give them some credit there. Tennessee's a pretty good team on the ground. Joe Milton is such a massive step back at quarterback from Hendon Hooker last year, though. It's almost hard to fathom how much of a step backwards Tennessee's passing game has taken. Of course, they lost two really good wide receivers, and Tennessee fans were under the insane delusion that they have some sort of plug and play offense under Josh Heupel. Like it didn't matter that they lost their best quarterback and two best wide receivers that they've had in however many years. They were just going to pluck whoever and put them in, and everything was going to be just like last year. Obviously, that's not the case. Turns out Josh Heupel might be a lot like Helen Keller in some ways, but he ain't no miracle worker. Tennessee's offense has sputtered at times this year, particularly through the air. Joe Milton has not played well. All that talk over the summer about Joe Milton being able to sit Indian style and throw 80 yards or whatever it is, turns out that doesn't actually translate to being decent at playing the quarterback position in college football. He's like a poor man's Anthony Richardson, Hendon Hooker is. They can't throw the ball to save their lives. When they do get a wide receiver open, overthrow Joe 20 yards over his head. It's happened time and time again this season. But surprisingly enough, Tennessee's defense has improved enough from last year to keep them in most games that they've played. And of course, right now they're sitting on just the one loss, a humiliating blowout defeat at the hands of a terrible Florida team way back in week 3 or 4, whatever week that was, about a month ago, I guess. So they just have the one loss. Alabama, a similar story, really. And with Alabama, it's even more surprising to me how bad Alabama's quarterback situation seemingly has become overnight, right? You just go back in time in your head, just a string of Bama quarterbacks, most recently Bryce Young, right? Before that, you had Mac Jones. And even though we only played the 1 year and it was 2020 and everybody was sleeping and no one watched, trust me, he had a really good year. Before that, right, you had Tua. Before that, you had Jalen Hurts. It's just been a long line of really, really good Alabama quarterbacks who not only were they good, they performed at an extremely high level. And now you look around the Alabama quarterback room and you see three different versions of the same can of corn. Jalen Mildew, Tyler Buckner, and Ty Simpson. And it's just been, it's honestly been painful to watch Alabama's offense. I'll give Tennessee's offense this. Tennessee's offense at least looks more congruent. Like you watch Tennessee's offense and it at least looks like they know what they're trying to do. You watch Alabama's offense and it just looks disjointed. The offensive line, which was supposed to be a huge strength of this team, is probably the most Alabama's offensive line is probably the most overrated position group of the offseason. Everybody spent how much time talking about how great Alabama's offensive line supposedly was going to be, and it's just been a letdown. They've not been great running the ball. They've been good. They've been above average even at running the ball. Let's give them the credit they deserve. But the pass protection has been horrendous. Jalen Mildew is one of the most sacked quarterbacks in college football, which is even more alarming given the fact that one of his only benefits is the fact that he's so mobile and athletic. That offensive line is so bad that teams are still getting to Jalen Mildew at an alarming rate. But they have been able to run the ball decent with Jace McClellan and Binky Williams, our pacifier friend. Binky Williams at running back. Outside of one game by Jermaine Burton at wide receiver, the wide receiver room has been disappointing for Alabama. And much like Tennessee, Alabama is a team who basically has been kept afloat by their defense. I'm not a stats guy. I'm not going to sit here and rattle off a bunch of numbers to you, but you can look it up if you want to. Every offensive category you look at for these two teams is down from last year, with the exception of Tennessee's run game. Tennessee has a better run game this year than they had last year. Alabama, points per game, total offense, rushing yards, passing yards, sacks allowed, average yards per play, third down efficiency. Any stat you look up for Alabama, you got to remember, Alabama for the last 4 or 5 years has been in the top five in almost every single offensive category on earth. And if they weren't in the top five, they were in the top 10. You can't find very many offensive stats for Alabama this season where they rank in the top 10. You just can't find them. Now, defensively, like I mentioned, they have played well. Their secondary has played well in most games. Their secondary even played well a lot of the time in the Texas game, which is Alabama's only loss. It let them down in key situations, and they did get burned by Texas. I'm not trying to slight Texas there. Alabama's secondary obviously didn't play great in that game, but it wasn't a complete dumpster fire. Texas just it kind of took advantage of some situations, but so Alabama's defense, Tennessee's defense, both been okay, but the offenses have just been a huge letdown. This season. So who wins this game? Third Saturday in October. This is a rivalry game, of course. These two teams have been playing every year for a long, long time. Teams don't like each other. This is the cigar game. Whichever team wins lights up, and the fan base lights up a cigar after the game. Big deal. Tennessee Alabama game. I've gone back and forth on this one. Alabama's favored by 9 in some places, 8.5 to 9. That seems like a lot of points. A lot of points. Tennessee finally got the win over Alabama last year after losing, 15 straight to the Gumps. Tennessee finally comes out and beats them last year in a wild game. 52 to 49 was the score of that game last year. Tennessee beat Bama 52 to 49. I don't think there'll be 49 points total scored in this game. There was 102 points scored in that game last year, or 101, whatever it was. I don't think there'll be 50 points scored in this game. These offenses are really, really bad. And because both of the defenses are pretty good, it's going to make it even more difficult for these offenses. Which one of these two quarterbacks, Joe Milton or Jalen Milroe, do you think will hit the one or two big plays in this game that will probably end up being the difference in the game? Who do you trust more out of those two QBs? Will Bama be able to run the ball on Tennessee? Will Tennessee be able to run the ball on Bama? If either of these teams can't run the ball, they're for sure going to lose. My guess is that both teams will have some success running the ball and moving the ball, and that both teams are going to take a couple of shots downfield. And kind of whichever one of those teams hits those shots is probably going to come away the winner of this game. I'm worried about Alabama's offensive line against the pass rush of Tennessee. Tennessee kind of quietly has one of the best pass rushers, not just in the SEC, but in the nation. They've got two guys, I think, two defensive linemen Tennessee does that are both in the top 20 in the country in sacks. Alabama's going to have to find a way to protect Mildew, especially on third downs. I mean, you can't just sit back there and run the ball over and over and over again. You're going to have some semblance of a passing game. For Tennessee, same thing. Joe Milton, for a guy that's been in college that long, he sure does look lost. And the concerning part to me, if you're Tennessee, is he appears to be worse as the season goes along. Last year, Tennessee won this one at home. This year, it's on the road in Bryant-Denny. A lot of times in these games when I'm having kind of a hard time picking, I can tell you right now, I'm not going to lay the 9 points with Bama. I think that's too many points in this game, 9. But what I do a lot of times in these games when it's pretty close and it's hard for me to choose is I say, okay, who's the home team? How much of an advantage is that? Well, it's a huge advantage for Bama to play at home. They have a big home field advantage. Bama doesn't play well on the road, so it's a huge deal for them to be at home. And Tennessee doesn't play well on the road either. Blown out by Florida in their only real road game this year. I think Alabama probably finds a way to win a close, low-scoring game. Pick your numbers here. 27 to 20, 24 to 17, 28 to 24, 26 to 20. I feel like it's going to be in that range. I think if anybody gets to 30 points, it's a slam dunk win here. 160 yards rushing or more is kind of a key number for Tennessee. They are undefeated under Josh Heupel, I believe, when they run for 160 yards or more. They did that last year in the Bama game. Can they get to that number this Saturday? I don't know. I think Bama probably wins a close one. I'm going to take Tennessee in the 9 points, but I think Bama probably wins a close one. Now on to the game that actually involves two teams that matter this year in the world of college football, Ohio State, Penn State. I've been high on these two teams. I've got Penn State 3. I've got Ohio State 4. I feel like a lot of people still have not watched an Ohio State football game. And I'm always hesitant to do this, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to go ahead and ask. Let me know down below. Have you watched the Penn State game this year? Did I say Ohio State? I meant Penn State. I know some people have watched the Ohio State, Notre Dame, and maybe one or two others. I feel like there's a lot of people who ain't watched no Penn State games this year. Is there anybody willing to admit that they haven't watched the Penn State game yet this year? Penn State's a pretty good team. Hey, guess who's got the 3 best defenses in the country in terms of points per game? Defensive scoring. Which 3 defenses in the country are 1, 2, and 3 in points per game? If you guessed Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, you were right. Not a surprise to see Penn State and Michigan up there. It is a little bit of a surprise, though, to see Ohio State up there. And, man, Ohio State sure did pick a good time to finally start taking defense seriously, right? I guess Ohio State, after years and years and years of getting bullied and pushed around and picked on and stepped on and mushed up because they're soft, I guess they finally decided to start taking defense seriously. And they sure did pick a good time to do it because the offense has taken a lot longer this season to get going than I thought it would. I was not all that surprised the first couple of weeks of the season when Ohio State's offense kind of plodded and trudged along a little. Kyle McCord didn't look great. Of course, if you go back all the way back to that week 1 game, there was 0 touchdown passes in that game. I probably would have made a bet at the beginning of the season. If somebody would have told me, Lou, there's going to be a game this year where Ohio State has 0 touchdown passes, I would have said, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. What happened in week 1? No touchdown passes for Kyle McCord in week 1. Now, he's gotten better as the season has gone along, and if you look at the numbers over his first 2 or 3 games and his last 2 or 3 games, you see a drastic difference and improvement in the last 2 or 3 games for Kyle McCord. You got to remember, it's his first year starting. He has gotten better, and he's just got an absolute abundance of weapons at wide receiver to work with. Some key injury situations for Ohio State, which, of course, is not good for the Ohio State man because apparently they can't win a game if they've got a player hurt. That's what they say, not me. I'm not saying that. I think every team in America's got players hurt and should go out there and play and blah, 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 like a normal, sane human being would think. But, of course, Ohio State fans don't think that way. Did you know that Ohio State has never lost a game because the other team was better? It's never happened, at least not according to Ohio State fans. They got a list of excuses a mile long every single time they win a game. But Emeka Egbuka, they're one of their star wide receivers, and Travion Henderson, their starting running back, battling some injuries. Neither played last week. Keep an eye on that. If you're going to bet on this game, that would be something you'd want to look into before you put your hard-earned money up on this game here. I tend to think they're probably going to play here against Penn State, and I think Ohio State's going to need them. Penn State's defense is out of this world. If you haven't watched Penn State play and you like defensive football, you're going to like what you see from Penn State on Saturday. I think this might be a little bit like the Ohio State-Notre Dame game, right? Penn State's got a first-year starter at quarterback, so does Ohio State. Drew Allar, Kyle McCord, neither one is really setting the world on fire numbers-wise, but both teams, like I said, play great defense. Ohio State in particular has an amazing run game led by Nick Singleton and defensive future Sunday stars on both sides of the ball here defensively. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see something similar to the Notre Dame-Ohio State game in terms of your final score. I think that one was, 17-10 or 17-14, whatever it was. Maybe a little bit above that, maybe 23-17. Honestly, probably similar to the Bama-Tennessee game. Honestly, probably a similar score. I also feel like if either of these teams manages to somehow get to 30 points, it's almost a guaranteed. It's almost a guaranteed win. Ohio State's favored anywhere, but 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5. It's moving around depending on when you look and where you look. Not only do I like Penn State to cover the spread here, I'm going to pick Penn State to win the game. Contrary to popular belief, I don't hate Ohio State. I think Ohio State's a good team. I think they're going to be a good team again this year. I think they're going to be in the Big Ten mix and the playoff mix right up until the end of the season like they are every single year. And I understand that Penn State never beats Ohio State, and all they do is lose to Ohio State and Michigan, and James Franklin can't get over the hump, and he hadn't beat them since 2016. And I understand all that. And I am factoring that in. But it seems to me that if Penn State and James Franklin aren't going to beat Ohio, I tell you what deal I'll make with you, Ohio State, man. I'm going to pick Penn State to win this game. If they don't, I'm never picking Penn State to beat Ohio State again until they do. Because if it feels like if they can't get it done this year, it's probably just not going to get done for Penn State. I mean, they have got to take advantage of this opportunity, and you can't overstate how big of a win this would be for Penn State if they get it. Because you got to remember they get Michigan later, but at home. So this is probably the tougher of the two tests for Penn State. Now, I obviously think Michigan is the best of the bunch. I've got Michigan ranked number 1, Penn State 3, Ohio State 4. So I think Michigan's the best team of the bunch. But Penn State gets them later at home. Huge advantage. Whereas this week they got to play at Ohio State. If they go on the road and beat Ohio State, I really like their chances to pull off what will be an upset later in the year again at home against a really good Michigan team. If Ohio State loses, well, then, the news goes from bad to worse because they also have to play Michigan later in the year. And unfortunately for Ohio State man and Ryan Day, Michigan and Jim Harbaugh seem to have their number lately. They've just had that defense on roller skates. They've had their way with them the last 2 years, and the games haven't been particularly close. Last year's Ohio State-Penn State game, if you remember, if you just looked at the final score, it didn't look all that close, about a 2-score game. But you got to remember, Penn State had the ball in that game with only a couple of minutes to go and a chance. It was a 1-score game, a chance to tie it up or take the lead, and a critical turnover that Ohio State turned into a defensive touchdown to kind of wrap that thing up at the end. I think we're headed towards a similar game here. I won't be shocked at all if you see a defensive touchdown in the Ohio State-Penn State game for 2 reasons. Number 1, 2 elite defenses this year. Number 2, 2 first-year starters at quarterback. And first-year starters at quarterback are prone to mistakes. Who can avoid the mistake? Penn State versus Ohio State. Who can come away with the defensive or special teams touchdown? And again, who can hit the big plays? And I'm going to be honest with you. I trust Ohio State more on hitting the big plays offensively than I do Penn State. Penn State's more of a grind you up, chew you up, spit you out type of thing. It literally beats you over 4 quarters. Ohio State can do that, and they're desperately trying to become a more physical team, but they also have the ability to beat you deep with those playmakers at wide receiver. So it's going to be a great game. Another hard one for me to pick here, but I'm going to go with Penn State to get the win on the road over the Buckeyes. Have a good morning.